It was my sister Emma's wedding day at St. Mary's Cathedral in Edinburgh. The ancient stone church stood majestically against the grey Scottish sky, its Gothic spires reaching towards the heavy clouds that threatened rain. I, Sophie, stood there as maid of honor, wearing the emerald green dress Emma had chosen to complement the Scottish thistle bouquets. James, the groom, waited at the altar adjusting his Highland Regiment tie, whilst 200 guests filled the oak pews, the sound of bagpipes echoing faintly from outside. The morning had begun in controlled chaos at the Balmoral Hotel on Princes Street. Emma looked radiant in her ivory silk gown with delicate Nottingham lace sleeves, whilst the hairdresser pinned Scottish heather into her auburn curls. I tried to suppress the dread consuming me from within. 3 weeks earlier, I'd discovered something about James that would shatter my 28-year-old sister's world. The weight of this knowledge had been crushing me every single day since. Our mother, Margaret, fussed over every detail, straightening Emma's train for the 100th time. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she kept saying, touching the pearl necklace that had been in our family for 4 generations. My father, William, paced nervously in his morning coat, checking his pocket watch repeatedly as if time might somehow skip the ceremony altogether. The wedding march began, played on the cathedral's ancient organ that had witnessed centuries of unions. I walked slowly behind the other bridesmaids, my hands trembling as I clutched the purple heather bouquet. The scent of old wood and candle wax filled my nostrils. James's parents, Lord and Lady Pemberton, sat rigidly in the front row, their aristocratic faces masks of propriety. His mother wore a powder blue suit with a matching fascinator that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. When Emma entered on our father's arm, the congregation rose as one. She was breathtaking, the cathedral's stained glass windows casting rainbow patterns across her dress. The antique veil that had belonged to our great-grandmother from Aberdeen framed her glowing face. James watched her approach with what appeared to be devotion, but I knew better. My stomach churned as I took my position beside the altar, the cold stone floor seeming to seep through my silk shoes. Reverend MacLeod began the ceremony in his deep Scottish brogue. His words about eternal love and sacred bonds echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Each phrase felt like a mockery of what was about to happen. I watched James holding Emma's hands, his Oxford education and banking career making him the perfect catch in everyone's eyes. But I knew what those manicured hands had done, where they had been just days ago. 3 weeks prior, I'd been leaving my shift at the Royal Infirmary where I worked as a junior doctor. It was past midnight when I'd seen James's distinctive Navy Jaguar parked outside a flat in Stockbridge. Not Emma's flat. She lived in Morningside. Curious and concerned, I'd waited. When he emerged at 3 a.m. with Charlotte, his ex-fiancée from university, my blood had run cold. The way he kissed her goodbye wasn't platonic. I'd followed him twice more after that, hating myself for spying, but needing to be certain. The second time, I'd seen them at a restaurant in Leith, hidden away in a corner booth, their hands intertwined over glasses of wine. Charlotte, with her sleek blonde bob and designer clothes, looked every inch the sophisticated London lawyer she'd become. I'd taken photographs with my phone, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. The third encounter, merely 5 days before the wedding, had been the worst. I'd overheard James on a call in the hotel bar where we'd been finalizing wedding arrangements. He thought he was alone in the corner. "Charlotte, darling, just wait until after the honeymoon. Emma's father has connections I need for the Singapore position. Once that's secured, we can be together properly. She'll get over it. Maybe we'll last 6 months, a year at most." Now, standing in this holy place, watching my sister about to bind herself to this despicable man, I felt physically sick. Reverend MacLeod reached the crucial moment. If anyone knows of any lawful impediment why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The silence was deafening. 200 people held their breath. This was typically just a formality, a relic from ancient times, but my mouth opened before my brain could stop it. "Stop!" My voice cracked through the sacred silence like a whip. Every head turned towards me in shock. Emma's bouquet trembled in her hands, orange blossoms scattering onto the stone floor. "Sophie, what in God's name are you doing?" she whispered, her face draining of color. "I can't let you do this, Em," I said, my voice stronger now despite the tears threatening to fall. "James has been seeing Charlotte. They're still together. I have proof. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. The cathedral erupted. Lady Pemberton stood abruptly, her fascinator quivering with indignation. This is absolutely preposterous. How dare you make such accusations? Lord Pemberton's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. Young lady, you'll be hearing from our solicitors. Emma's bouquet fell completely now. Orange blossoms and heather scattered across the ancient stones like fallen soldiers. You're ruining everything, she screamed, her Scottish accent thickening with emotion as it always did when she was upset. You've always been jealous, always trying to sabotage my happiness because you're miserable and alone. Her words stung, but I pressed on. Emma, look at the pictures. Listen to me, please. Last Tuesday, when he said he was at that banking conference in London, he was with Charlotte at her flat. I saw them. I heard him on the phone saying your marriage would last a year at most, that he needs Dad's connections for Singapore. James finally spoke, his public school accent crisp despite his obvious panic. Emma, darling, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Sophie's obviously mistaken. That was a business meeting with Charlotte, nothing more. But his face had gone ashen, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cathedral's chill. A business meeting at 3 a.m? I challenged. A business meeting where you told her you loved her? Where you said my sister was just a stepping stone? I showed Emma the photos on my phone, watched her face crumble as she saw the evidence. Is it true? Emma's voice was barely a whisper as she turned to James. Tell me she's lying. Tell me this is some horrible mistake. The congregation watched in stunned silence, some recording on their phones despite the setting. This would be Edinburgh gossip for months. James's silence spoke volumes. He loosened his tie, ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Emma, it's complicated. Charlotte and I have history, but I do care for you. Care for me? Emma's voice rose to a shriek. Care for me? You were going to marry me whilst planning to leave me for her? She ripped off her veil, throwing it at his feet. The ancient lace landed in a crumpled heap. 3 days ago, James. 3 days ago, you were with her whilst I was having my final dress fitting. Our cousin Fiona stood up from her pew. Emma, perhaps we should discuss this privately. But Emma was beyond consolation. She turned to the congregation, her tear-streaked face defiant. The wedding is off, but the reception's paid for, so please, go to the Preston Field house and enjoy the meal. God knows it cost enough. She started walking towards the exit, her train dragging behind her like a wounded animal. I moved to follow, but 2 ushers stepped forward. Miss, we need to ask you to leave, one said firmly. They were James's rugby mates from university, all muscle and no sympathy. As they escorted me out, I heard rapid footsteps behind us. Wait, James called out. The ushers paused, confused. James caught up, his morning coat disheveled, his boutonniere hanging at an angle. Sophie, we need to talk. We emerged into the grey Edinburgh afternoon. The castle loomed on its hill in the distance, tourists obvious to the drama unfolding below. A light drizzle had begun, typical Scottish weather that seemed fitting for the moment. James looked desperate, older than his 32 years. Why? He asked simply. Why couldn't you have just let it be? I would have made her happy enough. She would have had the life she wanted, the house in Brunsfield, the children, the status. Happy enough? I repeated incredulously. She deserves more than enough, James. She deserves someone who loves her completely, not someone using her as a stepping stone to Singapore. The rain was getting heavier now, soaking through my dress. You don't understand, James said, running his hands through his wet hair. Charlotte and I, it's complicated. Our families have been planning our union since we were children. When she broke it off to pursue her career in London, I was devastated. She helped me forget. So Emma was just a rebound? I asked, disgusted. A plaster for your wounded ego? James shook his head miserably. No, I do love Emma. Just not the way I love Charlotte. Charlotte's returning to Edinburgh. She's been offered a position at Macpherson and Associates. We were going to wait, do things properly after you'd used my sister and my father's connections. I finished for him. You're pathetic, James. Truly pathetic. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. Your family will never forgive you for this, he said. You've humiliated them in front of Edinburgh society, your mother's bridge club, your father's golf partners. Everyone was there. You've made enemies of the Pembertons. Do you have any idea what you've done? I yanked my arm free. I've saved my sister from a lifetime of lies. That's what I've done. I walked away, leaving him standing in the rain in his sodden mourning suit, a groom without a bride. I found Emma at the Dean Cemetery, sitting on a bench near our grandmother's grave. Her wedding dress was ruined, mud staining the hem, rain having destroyed her carefully styled hair. She looked up when she heard me approach, mascara streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. "Gran always said you were the brave one," she said quietly. I sat beside her, not caring about the wet bench soaking through my bridesmaid dress. "I'm sorry for what I said in there, about you being jealous and alone. That was cruel. You were in shock," I said. "I understand." We sat in silence, watching the rain fall on the old gravestones. A crow cawed from a nearby tree, the only sound besides the pattering rain. "You know what the worst part is?" Emma said eventually. "I suspected something. Wee things, like how he'd tense up when Charlotte's name was mentioned, or how he'd guard his phone. But I wanted the fairy tale so badly that I ignored it all." A group of tourists with umbrellas walked past, speaking German, obvious to the two bedraggled women in formal wear sitting in a cemetery. One of them took a photo of us, probably thinking we were some sort of art installation. That evening, we ended up at our favorite pub in Grassmarket, still in our ruined dresses. The bartender, Hamish, who'd known us since we were teenagers sneaking in with fake IDs, poured us whiskey without asking. "Heard about the cathedral," he said simply. "It's all over Facebook already." By our third drink, Emma was laughing through her tears. Can you imagine Lady Pemberton's face? I thought her fascinator was going to fly off her head like a frightened bird. We giggled helplessly, the whiskey and emotional exhaustion making everything seem absurdly funny. "At least the reception food won't go to waste," Emma said. "I heard Cousin Archie took 3 plates and wrapped up cake in napkins for later." We dissolved into laughter again, earning looks from the other patrons. Our brother Tom arrived from Glasgow around midnight, having driven down as soon as he heard. "You all right, Em?" he asked, wrapping her in a bear hug. Then he turned to me. "And you, Sophie. That took guts. Mum's having kittens, but Dad said he's proud of you. Said you did what he didn't have the courage to do." The next week was brutal. James's family threatened legal action for humiliation and breach of promise. Charlotte actually had the audacity to ring Emma to apologize, claiming she never meant for things to go so far. Emma hung up on her mid-sentence. The Edinburgh social scene buzzed with gossip, everyone taking sides. The story even made it into the Scottish Sun. Highland Cathedral horror, bride jilted at altar after sister's shocking revelation. But support came from unexpected places. Mrs. McAllister, our old piano teacher, sent a card saying, "Truth is always better than a beautiful lie." The florist refused to charge for the flowers, saying she'd been cheated on herself and understood. Even Lady Pemberton's own sister, estranged for years, rang to say she wasn't surprised, that James had always been a right wee shite, just like his father. 3 months later, Emma received a letter from Charlotte. We read it together over tea in my flat overlooking Arthur's Seat. Charlotte explained how James had pursued her relentlessly, how he'd convinced her that Emma knew and accepted the situation, that theirs was a marriage of convenience. She'd discovered the truth only after the wedding fiasco and had immediately ended things with James. She was moving back to London, wanting nothing more to do with him. "The bastard lied to everyone," Emma said, crumpling the letter. "Even Charlotte. He created this whole web of deception." She stood and walked to the window, watching hikers climb the ancient volcanic hill. "You know what? I'm glad it happened. Better to find out before than after." 6 months later, at a medical conference in Glasgow, I introduced Emma to my colleague David, a cardiac surgeon from Aberdeen, with a wicked sense of humor and absolutely no connections to Edinburgh society. He was refreshingly straightforward, the type who said what he meant and meant what he said. Their first date lasted 12 hours. They talked until the sun came up over the Clyde. A year later, I was Emma's maid of honor again, this time at a small ceremony on the Isle of Skye. Only 20 guests, no aristocracy, no pomp. David's vows made everyone cry when he said, "I promise to love you honestly, completely, and without reservation. No secrets, no lies, just truth and terrible dad jokes for the rest of our lives. During my speech at the reception in a cozy Highland pub, I said, "Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is speak the truth, even when our voice shakes, even when the whole world is watching." Emma found her real fairy tale not in spite of what happened at St. Mary's, but because of it. Because she deserved someone who chose her first, not as a consolation prize. James, we heard through the Edinburgh grapevine, moved to Singapore alone. His position there lasted 6 months before he was let go for ethical violations. Apparently, he'd been falsifying expense reports. Lord Pemberton had to pull significant strings to keep it out of the papers. Charlotte married a barrister from London and had twins. She sent Emma a congratulations card when David and Emma had their first child, a gesture of closure that Emma appreciated. 2 years after the cathedral incident, Emma and I stood again at our grandmother's grave, this time bringing flowers for her birthday. Emma carried her baby daughter, Flora, named after Gran. "Remember when we sat here in the rain, me in that ridiculous ruined dress?" Emma asked. "You looked like a drowned Victorian ghost," I laughed. Hamish probably still tells that story to tourists. Emma adjusted Flora's tiny knitted hat against the Edinburgh wind. "I never thanked you properly, Soph." "Not really. You risked everything. Family, reputation, even my love, to save me from a terrible mistake. You would have done the same for me," I said simply. But Emma shook her head. "I don't know if I would have been brave enough. Standing up in that cathedral, in front of all those people, knowing you'd be escorted out, knowing Mum would be mortified, knowing the Pembertons would try to destroy us. That took real courage." As we walked back through the cemetery gates, Emma stopped and turned to me. "You know what Gran would have said? A lie has speed, but truth has endurance. You gave me endurance, Sophie. You gave me a truth I could build a real life on." Looking back now, that moment in St. Mary's Cathedral feels like something from another lifetime. The security escorting me out, James chasing after me in his morning suit, the rain soaking us as we stood arguing in the street. It all seems surreal, but every decision made that day led us here. Emma genuinely happy with a man who adores her, me knowing I did right by my sister, and even James, hopefully, learning that you can't build happiness on deception. The truth that day was devastating. It destroyed what seemed perfect and scandalized Edinburgh society. But from those ashes grew something authentic, something stronger, something real. Because in the end, that's what we all deserve. Love built on truth, not illusions. Love that doesn't need secrets to survive. Love that can face reality and choose to stay. That evening at Flora's christening, held at a small church in the Highlands, with no fanfare or society pages, photographers, Emma pulled me aside. "Remember you asked me once if I'd have been happy not knowing? Living in ignorance?" I nodded. "I would have known eventually," she said. "The truth always comes out. But by then, I might have had children with him, been financially dependent, been trapped. You didn't just save me from a bad marriage, Sophie. You saved me from a life built on lies." As I watched her return to David, who was making their daughter laugh with silly faces, I knew she was right. Sometimes the greatest act of love is telling the truth, no matter how much it hurts. Because truth, unlike lies, gives us the power to choose our own path. And that's the greatest gift anyone can give.